This month on 219 West, they're back! Carrie, Charlotte, Samantha, and Miranda are bringing the words sex and the city back together again. Also, Sex in the City. How the show has made sex toys and sex art appropriate for polite conversation. How pillow talk moved to dinner time conversation. And you can't be sexy in the city without fabulous fashion. How Manhattan women shop till they drop a bundle. Hi, and welcome to this month's edition of 219 West, the monthly news magazine produced by students at the CUNY Graduate School of Journalism for CUNY TV. I'm Margaret Teisch. We'll have those stories prompted by this month's release of Sex in the City 2. Also this month on 219 West, the serious side of sex. We'll hear about an alarming new report on HIV and other sexually transmitted diseases in New York City. How real is the threat? Plus, greening your vino, how wine lovers can't seem to get enough of the organic stuff. And later, burlesque, a century-old performance, is enjoying a resurgence, how taking it all off is taking off. But first, the clothes. Can you think of Sex in the City without the fashion? Carrie Bradshaw's other best friends, Prada, Manolo, and Louis V, had about as many appearances on the show as Samantha, Miranda, and Charlotte. But let's get real. Do New York women really shop like that?
New York has an amazing fashion tradition forever. I mean, New York has always been really fancy and really fashion conscious, and in lots of different ways. There's, downtown fashion and uptown fashion and crazy club kid fashion and drag queens, and there's so many wonderful influences. You can kind of go whatever direction you want.
Meet Sintra Wilson. She shops for a living. Well, sort of.
I've been writing the critical shopper column since 2007 for the New York Times, which is a column where we write about stores, but we get to be critical, so we don't always have to be nice.
So how does Sintra shop?
Try to go in with a real blank slate and not have any preconceived opinions when I go into a place. And I just kind of try to take it in on a real raw level and go where the store informs me. I mean, every store is like this little terrarium of some fantasy life. I mean, any store that you go into is building this fantasy lifestyle. And so you can go in and kind of be a tourist in this fantasy lifestyle that they've built. And that's fun, or not. Sometimes it's really not. Sometimes you don't want to be in their world at all.
In a city with 800 fashion houses, 5,000 fashion showrooms, and 8 fashion schools, is there pressure to dress a certain way?
A city like New York, whether it be, during the day, like going to work, or like the nightlife, which both is very prominent, you still need to be on the top of your game when it comes to appearance.
Yeah, I definitely think that New York City spent a lot of money and a lot of their time on fashion. They focus a lot on fashion, especially from, us. We're young, but we see it a lot. And you see, this is what we do. We do the same thing. We emulate them.
So I think a lot of people kind of look to New York as a mecca and inspiration in different ways. And they're also, it's very idealized.
Janet Paskin is the managing editor at Bundle.com, a website that analyzes consumer spending habits using data from city card transactions and third-party metrics. I sat down with Janet to find out how much New Yorkers spend on shopping.
I think that there's this idea that women in New York spend a ton of money shopping, on beauty, on all those kinds of high lifestyle, single girl kinds of things.
Okay.
And I have to tell you, there's something to that.
Really?
There really is. When you look at the numbers in Manhattan especially, women in Manhattan spend about $455 a month on clothing, shoes, and other wear. Then if we want to compare that to women around the country, we pull up the box below, which enables you to start a comparison. And there, if we leave the location blank, it'll get us to the US averages. And here's where we see, when we compare this, that women in New York, in Manhattan, spent $455, this is for December of 2009, compared to women around the country who spent $151 on average.
So let's back up a little bit and talk about New York in general, because we've been talking about Manhattan, and it seems like it could be easy to lump them all together, but the data shows maybe something different.
Absolutely. Your outer boroughs, Brooklyn, Queens, Staten Island, and the Bronx, are much closer to the country as a whole. And that makes sense because New York is a city of 8 million people, so you do have a broad diversity of incomes and ages and cultures, and that starts to show up.
Cintra Wilson puts it another way.
Manhattan women are freaking rich. I mean, it's like, this is what we're really talking about. These are the daughters and wives of major hedge funders. These are the people that stuff is made for to a large degree. I mean, I think, girls like you and I mean, I can tell by the way everybody in the store puts themselves together. They're clever, they find select pieces that they really like. You might drop more money than you actually have on like one really great thing a year or something, and then the rest you put together like kind of on spit and gum and the Salvation Army and something from the Gap, and and then every once in a while you get some really knockout belt and it pulls it all together. I mean, it's like that's the fun part about fashion, I think, is actually making something out of nothing.
The recent recession put a lot of people's spending habits on a strict diet, especially for luxury goods. But now, as we get ready for the premiere of the sequel on May 27th, reports are that many people have regained their appetite for the finer things in life. We all know that sex sells. For years, Madison Avenue has used sex to sell all kinds of products. But what about those items that are about sex? David Montalvo found out that the popularity of Sex in the City has broken many of the taboos of buying objects like sex toys and sex art.
This is the soundtrack to Sex and the City, an Emmy Award-winning show and some say a cultural phenomenon. Although a new episode of the show hasn't aired on television since 2004, syndication and movie deals have kept the show's influence on the business of sex in the city very hot.
For many, many years, women have struggled to kind of like take away the embarrassing part of the sex industry, and I think Sex and the City has kind of like targeted that because it's not a bad thing, Women need to embrace their sexuality, and that's one thing that I love, that I really do respect about the show. It's a really good and like little push for women,
Dos Santos got into the adult toy industry years before the show began in 1998. It's an industry that has continued to flourish even through the recent deep recession. The adult toy industry has reported 10 to 30% increase in the sales of sex toys, especially on high-priced, high-tech vibrators.
A woman's sex drive is stronger, a woman's sex drive is more demanding, and so men have had trouble competing with a woman's sex drive. So men have taught women, shut up, don't talk about it. It's bad, you're a whore, you're a harlot, and throughout history we've seen that. And so that's one of the reasons why I like Sex in the City, because it's like, shut up, it's not like that anymore, talk about it. It's important to talk about it. Even with your girlfriends, talk about it.
Whether or not real women are now openly talking about sex, the show's fictional characters, Carrie, Samantha, Charlotte, and Miranda, certainly did. And one conversation in particular during the first season drove adult toy sales here at Tic Tac Toe way up. Charlotte's addiction to the battery-operated rabbit.
Okay, where is it? What are you talking about? The rabbit, Charlotte. Hey, the rabbit. Hey. It's a vibrator. It's not like it's cracked.
That show is a gay show. Maureen Dowd said it's the gayest show on television. And she was right.
Charles Leslie's gallery focuses on gay erotica. He says the women in the show more closely mirror the attitudes and lives of gay New York men than straight urban women.
I think that most young women and the lumpen proletariat across the country missed the fact that all those women were gay men in women's bodies.
But he says a more sexually open culture has made some of his artwork more socially acceptable.
And we present art of a certain kind for a certain public. And even though sales have dropped off some, we are happy to say that we are not at ground zero yet.
The gallery has seen sales grow on less expensive pieces ranging from $50 to $150. Still, sales of pieces costing $1,000 or more are exceptions.
And anything above that it's a rare sale, but we have done it. We've had some $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 sales in this last season.
But he said he isn't surprised by the growth in adult toy sales.
Well, that's because it's been more accepted by the mainstream. I mean, there are housewives in Podunk who buy toys to play with their husbands with. You know, I mean, it no longer has the kind of negative connotation that it once had.
But this psychologist believes that in the recent economic crisis, housewives rush to buy toys for themselves.
One indirect force that we may be seeing is depressed husbands. And so when you're depressed, you don't really want to have sex. One of the strong indicators of depression, a symptom of depression, is diminished sexual desire. So it may be that one factor is that there are a lot of unemployed men who are really not feeling so good about themselves, and women are going out and finding an alternative in sex toys.
This is where the show's lead character, Carrie Bradshaw, lived, often typing at her desk and looking out the window, pondering questions like, in a city like New York, I can't help but wonder, are adult toy sales a reliable indication of sexually empowered women?
Well, I don't think we know the answer to that question. It's a great research question, right? So as a researcher, what I'd want to do is stand at the door and talk to people. Oh, you're coming in. What's bringing you in here today? Tell me the story of how you got here.
Hi, I need something that will make a guy in his pants as soon as he sees me. Got it. You talk to salespeople like that? I'm here all the time. They love me.
I always say, like, when you put the lingerie on, let the inner slut out. She needs to come out. And it's as soon as you if you put on some vinyl and it squeezes, you're like, oh my God, you know? Or if you put on a sexy breast, like, oh my, like, what am I doing? That little slut is trying to pick it out, you know? Let her come out in the bedroom.
For 219 West, I'm David Montalvo.
You gotta do it, you know?
While there's a new openness about sex and sexuality, some of the old problems still exist. Roshana Rapkins has been looking into the health aspect of sex in the city. She is with us here at 219 West. Roshana?
With me today is Dr. Philip Alcabez, Professor of Urban Public Health at Hunter College's School of Health Sciences. Dr. Alcabez is an epidemiologist whose latest book is called Dread: How Fear and Fantasy Have Fueled Epidemics from the Black Death to Avian Flu. Thank you for joining us today.
Pleased to be here.
And can you tell us just a little bit about your book?
This book is a historical view of the way in Western society we've viewed epidemics, thought about epidemics, and, to use the sociologist's jargon, constructed epidemics. The way that our social anxieties and moral and political agendas have contributed to the framing or construction of an epidemic crisis now and then. So there's a chapter in the book that has to do with sexually transmissible infections, and another chapter that has to do with AIDS, that tries to take a longer historical and broader social view, not just the narrow kind of medical or statistical view of the epidemiologist, and asks, what do we mean when we say that there's an out-of-control epidemic?
So TV series such as Sex and the City have been praised for creating kind of a climate of greater openness about sexuality. However, recent statistics released by the Department of Health and Mental Hygiene suggest that there's a growing number of STD infections among certain populations in New York City. What do these findings tell us?
Most of us have known for a long time, and not just epidemiologists, most people know that some bad things can happen from sex, although they're not very likely. Infections, unwanted pregnancy. The new statistics tell us a little bit more of that. I feel that the health department is, with their press releases, some of the rhetoric about the supposed meaning of the upturn in the rates of certain diseases is trying to create a crisis where none exists.
There was a study that was recently published in the New England Journal of Medicine, and it revealed that among certain populations, like black men living in urban areas, and especially men that have had sex with other men, that HIV rates are higher than those in sub-Saharan Africa. And so, I guess, hearing that, it does feel alarming.
The take-home message from data about HIV is that epidemics, outbreaks of contagious diseases are complex things, and they take on different appearances in different parts of the population. There's a complex interaction between a microbe, in this case, the human immunodeficiency virus, and humans and the way humans interact. And part of that is behavior, but sexual behavior is probably a very small part of the complex puzzle of what makes a disease or an infection expand more rapidly in one part of the population and less so in others.
Currently, 30% of new HIV infections are among women. And I'm just curious, do you have any insight into why that might be?
In some way, what we in the US, and particularly in New York, are kind of geared to think of HIV infection as a gay men's problem. And I think that's fallacious. I don't think that's right. And while it's true that there have been very high rates of AIDS in gay populations in this country, it's not true that it's a gay disease. So it's given that this is a sexually transmissible infection, given that men have sex with women, that it's not so surprising that women would contract HIV sometimes.
Okay. Thank you very much for being with us. It was good to have you on the show.
I'm happy to be here.
Dr. Alcabiz, Roshana, thank you both. We'll be right back. Next, greening your vino. On Sex and the City, when the girls went out, their drink of choice was the Cosmo. Always trendy, it's not unlikely that today they would be sipping an organic Cabernet. And it's also possible that the wine would come from a vineyard not very far from Manhattan. Janet Lawrence has the story.
As the organic movement takes off, New York City wine stores are stocking up on earth-friendly wines. According to the most recent study by the Organic Trade Association, organic wine sales grew by 20% in 2003. At Discovery Wines on the Lower East Side, organic wines are almost literally flying off the shelves.
It's going great. We're selling a lot of great organic, biodynamic, sustainable, small family artisanal wines. And it's been a really great few months.
But there is some debate about what makes the most earth-friendly wine. Some environmentally conscious consumers want wine that is produced without pesticides. Others prefer only that it's locally made. Shin Estate Vineyard on Long Island does both. Just an hour and a half from Manhattan, the vineyard proudly cultivates organically grown grapes.
We're actually going to just kind of walk on them.
Barbara Shin and her husband David Page have spent the last decade making Merlot, Cabernet Franc, and other wines with biodynamic farming practices. You can visit their tasting room right on the vineyard on Long Island's North Fork, where Shin herself gives tours of the vines.
So we are not using any man-made fertilizers. We use fish and seaweed and compost and limestone and many other organic materials. If you are using agricultural chemicals and man-made fertilizers and insecticides, you're killing your soil. The vines are not digging their roots deep down into the soil and accessing the natural minerals.
Shin's vineyard is in year 1 of the 3-year USDA organic certification. When the vineyard gets certified, Shin will be required to label her products under one of 3 categories: 100% organic, organic, or made with some organic ingredients. 100% organic wine contains grapes cultivated without pesticides and have no added sulfites, a type of preservative. Organic wine contains organic grapes but may also contain sulfites.
I actually enjoy the biodynamic standards for winemaking, which is adding a very, very small amount of sulfur to the wine in order to stabilize it.
Organic labeling doesn't reflect all of the Shin's earth-centric practices. They feed and harvest their vines according to the lunar cycle and use naturally occurring yeasts as opposed to those developed in a lab in 2 of their wines.
This is actually a sample bottle.
Jenny Lefcourt, a natural wine importer, criticizes organic certification because 200 additives, like gelatin for example, exist and can be included in organic wine. Although there is no official natural wine certification, it uses organic grapes and indigenous yeast and has no additives. Lefcourt co-owns Jenny and Francois Selections, which imports natural wine from Europe and California. She believes grapes that go from vine to bottle without interference make the most interesting wines.
If you care about the environment and you want to produce something that tastes good, then you're not going to try to have high yields and get as many grapes as you can off the vine and use a lab yeast to create a specific taste profile and use lots of sulfites because your grapes are unhealthy.
Without pesticides and preservatives, making natural wine is riskier than conventional wines, but consumers, Lefcourt says, appreciate the difference. Discovery Wines hosted a tasting for the natural wines that Jenny and Francois import.
These wines are not artificial. They really reflect the region and the skill of the winemaker as well. So it's really interesting to be drinking something so natural.
Local, organic, natural, biodynamic. When you stock up for your next environmentally friendly dinner party, the labels might leave you more confused than when you started. But you can rest easy knowing that every sip supports growing the sustainable food movement and shrinking your carbon footprint. For 219 West, I'm Janet Lawrence.
Burlesque and the thrill of the tease. Once popular, this erotic performance art faded into the shadows. But, as Uche Abanobi reveals, the tease is enticing audiences once again.
Meet Sharon Nolan, or as her fans know her, Prairie Fire. The burlesque beauty knows how to tease and titillate. The Saskatchewan redhead gave up her career as a costumer 9 years ago for burlesque. She has been perfecting her craft ever since. Her routine is sexy, but don't call it a striptease.
I prefer to think of it in its traditional term, which is parody. It's making fun of things, finding the satire and the parody in situations.
Burlesque, which mixes music with comedy, emerged in Europe during the 1840s. It was a broad adaptation of opera or theater, but in a provocative fashion. By the early 20th century, an American form of burlesque appeared. This type of entertainment was a blend of parody, performance, and striptease. It aimed to turn social norms upside down. Traditionally, the genre includes dancing, comedians, singers, mimes, and striptease artists, all in a risque and humorous manner. Today, looser American forms can be seen by stars like Dita Von Teese and even the Pussycat Dolls. But it's the traditional that inspires Nolan. She incorporates humor into her routine by utilizing Gerard, a dummy, as her partner. The skit tends to get the attention of audience members.
Rather than her stripping herself, she was stripping, her mannequin was stripping her, so it was a couples act, but it was a singles act. Lovely.
The whole illusion of her creating 2 characters and that she's only one person, that to me is what makes it work.
Nolan developed her routine from watching classic burlesque footage. She put her own unique twist on it by introducing Gerard.
It's gotten to the point where he really does things independently of me. I've been interviewed with him where he's like just doing stuff while I'm talking.
Fellow performer Paul Hutchinson has known Nolan for over 3 years and is a big fan of her routine with Gerard.
It gives that safety zone too, where you can allude to things that like giving a woman drinks and stuff like that to get her into bed and not have it be too offensive because she's working the puppet.
Nolan puts a lot of effort into her act, and it paid off during a recent visit to New York.
I like to take my time with the makeup and the costumes and have a lot of time to sort of focus and prepare.
Despite all her preparations, There were 2 instances in the past where Nolan forgot her lines and briefly ran off stage.
The interesting thing about both of those shows that are horrible in my memory is that those are the only 2 times I've ever had a standing ovation.
Standing ovation or not, Prairie Fire knows how to make a blazing impression. For 219 West, this is Uche Abenubi.
And finally, we've talked about the glamour and the sex and the spirit of Sex and the City. But what about the TV series From Whence It Came? Even though it's been off the air for 6 years, the physical symbols of the show, the digs and the dives, the watering holes and the high-end diners have entered iconic status. As Jonathan Balthazar found out, people still make pilgrimages to the very places where Carrie, Charlotte, Samantha, and Miranda once walked, in their stilettos.
They come from near
But I go to school in New Jersey.
and far.
I'm actually from Canada. Dublin. Norway.
But all these women share one thing in common. They've come to one place to follow in the footsteps of 4 women. It's Sex and the City, the HBO series chronicling the lives of Carrie, Miranda, Charlotte, and of course, Samantha. 4 New York women. Probably the best way to relive the exploits of these ladies is through the Sex and the City tour, operated by On Location Tours. Georgette Blau, the president of On Location Tours, founded her company in 1998. On Location operates dozens of different tours around New York and Washington, D.C., but the Sex and the City tour is one of the most popular, running up to 30 per week.
Past couple of years, it's really exploded. It's become really, really popular.
The pilgrimage begins at the Pulitzer Fountain in front of the Plaza Hotel, where fans meet their resident sexpert, who will guide them through the glamorous world of Sex and the City. Amy Albert is one of those sexperts who have been running tours for almost 3 years.
Even if you're not a fan, the best part is that you get to see the city, you get an overview of the city, you get to get off the bus and explore and check it out a little bit on your own, and I try to make you laugh and I try to keep you involved as much as I can.
The tour takes guests to dozens of different sites featured in Sex and the City. At the Pleasure Chest, people can purchase any sex toy for 10% off, and most girls opt for the rabbit that Kristen Davis's character purchased in season 1. Another popular stop is at Magnolia Bakery in the West Village, where guests munch on complimentary cupcakes. Later, the guests are whisked off to Steve's Bar in Soho, where they can drink discounted Cosmos and feel like one of the girls. Even though Sex and the City ended over 6 years ago, the siren call of Carrie Bradshaw and her sisters remains strong. But it's not the expensive clothes and luxe lifestyle these girls are known for that keeps fans coming. It's actually that they're relatable.
I think that in every show you probably can relate to a situation. You don't have to be Manhattan and have a lot of money. It's just a lot of fun.
I see myself as one of the girls. They're really down to earth and they're doing things that we normal people also do.
When I was watching the show years and years ago, I was like, this is me and my friends. The stories are, the storylines in the series is something that we've all experienced.
So who do these Sex and the City fans identify with? Well, everyone.
I'm definitely Carrie.
I have to say, I think I'm a little bit of a Samantha.
Everyone says I'm a little bit of Charlotte, but I think I'd rather be Carrie.
But I swear I'm not a Samantha. Maybe with a few drinks, but no, don't tell my husband.
Carrie.
You're Carrie.
Yeah, right.
Samantha.
Yeah, I'm Miranda.
Why are you Miranda?
I'm okay with that because she's successful, she's hot, she gets loads of sex, so I'm fine with it.
For 219 West, I'm Jonathan Balthazar.
That's this month's edition of 219 West from the CUNY Graduate School of Journalism. Next month, more stories about the people and issues of New York City. You can also find us on iTunes. I'm Margaret Teisch. Thanks for watching.